Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
Hey everyone, this is your host Greg Myers, and this podcast marks the last episode in our Pulse of Payments series featuring open banking platform Trustly. And to close it out with a bang, I have Trustly President of North America, Pete Ohser. Pete is a true industry veteran with more than 20 years in the payment space and a byline that includes an integral part in developing the first risk system for online money transfer platforms. In his own words, Trustly is a payments company that does data really, really well. They have been in the marketplace since 2008, originating in Europe, where the open banking platforms are much more widely used. But according to Pete, the U.S. is primed for adoption and the need is growing at a rapid pace. What are some of the main motivators for early adopters? A lot of it has to do with the speed and low-cost payment options, and when it comes to benefits, they are strong on both the merchant and consumer sides of the equation. According to Pete, the world is ready for alternatives to cards, and Trustly has a strong commitment to blazing that trail in the open banking space. Tune in and hear him talk about the journey of open banking from an EU perspective, the rise of adoption in the US, and what the future looks like for open banking as it relates to the simplification of cross-border payments, geographical expansion, greater bank regulation, and the possibility of one single API to hit the entire world. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Pete. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, and more specifically, this special episode on the Pulse of Payments, where we're going to be doing a deep dive on open banking. So thank you so much, Pete, for being here.
It's wonderful to be here, Greg. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's dive in. Tell our audience a little bit about your background and your role today at Trustly.
Okay, so been in payments for more than 20 years, but really came into payments as a risk analyst coming out of the consumer credit area and then shifted into kind of counterparty risk inside a payments business, MoneyGram International. So that was like in the early 2000s. And it was interesting because I was actually tasked to build the kind of first risk system for our online money transfer platform. And through there, I moved through a bunch of various roles: operational, strategic, planning, finance, and eventually into P&L management. So I was the chief revenue officer at MoneyGram for the last 4 years of my time there. And after that, went on to join a private equity-backed company where we restructured a payments business focused on payments and the digital experience for city and county governments, which was kind of interesting. And I joined Trustly as president of the Americas in September of just this past year. So I'm really excited to be here. I lead the go-to-market functions, product sales, marketing, and support.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk about the company. So tell us what Trustly does.
So we're a payments company that does data really, really well. And we span across North America, we span across Europe and Australia as our operating markets today. But really, we think of ourselves as a payments business, but we also do data. So we really leverage the power of open banking to provide ACH, or what I'd say account-based payments, often guaranteed, but not necessarily. And we're able to do that because of data that consumers share with us. That data can be used for other businesses to enable all kinds of other services as well. So, for example, we help companies make payments, we load wallets, we can do real-time payouts. We help marketplaces onboard merchants, validate bank data, capture PII, all kinds of things like that. So we can just simple check a balance. And then we can also do things like tokenize banking data for greater security. So we operate across a wide variety, but we definitely think of ourselves as a payments business. And we're really focused on large enterprises today. We work with some smaller businesses, but we are working with a lot of remittance firms, big e-commerce, sports betting and online fantasy games, app-based delivery companies and rideshare programs. And we're seeing a lot of interest from QSRs and the convenience and travel areas.
And Trustly was founded back in 2008, but really came to the U.S., I think, around 2019, and has had a pretty big impact in the U.S. So can you talk about that expansion, why Trustly did it? Why has it been so successful here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so Trustly, was based in Europe, still is based in Europe, in Stockholm, and they have been around, as you said, since 2008, and really were leaders in account-based, open banking-based payments across Europe. But that market is much more mature. As they were looking at their strategic plans, they wanted to expand into North America, knowing that this model would be coming into the States. And so they acquired a company in 2019 called Pay with My Bank, which is now Trustly North America. And Pay with My Bank had been around for a while, but was what I'd say a fledgling startup who was, going through all the normal startup hiccups. But, that business has now caught on fire. And so in 2019, our business is up 20x in 2021 from where it was in 2019. So just amazing growth and traction coming across the market as the market starts to recognize the power of open banking.
And why do you think that open banking or the U.S. is so ripe for open banking, and why now?
It's a great question, but what's ripe is the value proposition for the merchant is clear. Like that's just absolutely clear. It's a great consumer experience, and it's a fraction of accepting cards. So for the merchant, it's clear. For the consumers, it was historically less clear, but it is becoming much more widely adopted. And I think this is the interesting part of it, right? So what we're seeing is obviously with the pandemic and massive growth in online, we're seeing people are, opening more financial service accounts. They're going through open banking just to validate or open accounts or attach a bank account to brokerage statements, to all kinds of other types of neobanks. And so they're becoming very familiar with the flow. And that's been a huge, wind at our back. And so consumers are starting to realize that this is a significant opportunity for them, and they're just much more comfortable.
And, as someone who's been around payments, you know this very well. Any type of sort of new payment option or method or way of transacting, you've kind of got the chicken and the egg, right? You've got the merchant who doesn't want to implement it unless there's enough consumers. Consumers don't want to do it if they can't do it at all the places they shop. So, you've got that chicken and egg scenario. So how have you seen that play out in the open banking space?
Well, that has certainly been real in this market. So, what I'd say is, you go back in North America, in the U.S., prior to 2019, I mean, Pay with My Bank was trying to get that chicken and egg going, and they got a few large merchants who really started the process, and now that flywheel is really spinning. But what we found was that early adoption began in merchants that really valued speed and low cost. So, for example, it could have been, loading a crypto wallet or sending a real-time money transfer somewhere. I come from the money remittance space, right? So if you're going to send $300 to somebody and put it on your card in an online environment, that's very expensive on the interchange. And it could eat up 50% of revenue costs, and then you still have other costs. So it actually is a really poor money transfer. You would think that it should be cheaper online, but if you're using a card, it's actually much more expensive. So products like ours really have been able to kind of make way in there where people can say, oh, I can do this task and I can get it immediately. I can load a wallet, I can play a fantasy iGaming or something and get it. So that's been huge value as they build confidence in the product. They just see the ease of it, and now they're starting to expand it into all kinds of merchant categories.
And do you see, just kind of thinking about some of the scenarios that you've given, do you see a younger audience on the consumer side adopting it because they're less worried about security and fraud by putting their bank credentials into a website?
We definitely see it skew a little bit towards millennials and to the younger, but it's really very much, merchant specific and who's transacting with that merchant. But there's no doubt that younger folks are more comfortable in this environment. And they're, in some areas, older generation, if I tell my mother who's in her 80s, put your online banking credentials, there's a little bit of why would I ever do that, right? So we still have some work to do to get through that, but it really is generational where we're seeing the younger, the Robinhood crowds, they use open banking to create their accounts. So they're very comfortable in this environment.
Let's turn to Europe, and as you know, they have the PSD2 there, which is sort of this more regulated framework for open banking. But I would say not so much here in the U.S. So is that an advantage here? Is it a disadvantage? Talk about that a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly, we looked at the model, we understand the model, but I don't necessarily think it's an advantage or a disadvantage. I think, structure in a market is really good, right? Everybody understands the rules. But Trustly went in and we just set our own goals. And we said, hey, we must be a bank friendly. We have to be open, transparent, and collaborative, right? Ultimately, the network, this is the consumer and their bank relationship. We don't want to come between the consumer and their bank. We want to make this work as best as possible. So we've taken a very strong posture on being bank friendly. And then for us, we also wanted to be very focused on quality. And so what we know is, we don't screen scrape, we build custom APIs to retrieve data, and we're kind of in this relentless pursuit of quality. And I think one of the interesting things is that in Europe, for example, while they have these PIS connectors, the quality is actually quite poor in some markets. The banks haven't really adopted them. They kind of did a poor job of implementing these things. So consumers and payments can have a really poor experience as well. And so we actually have, in some areas, a much higher quality because we're able to just manage ourselves and we're not super dependent on the bank to be able to build out these APIs. And then the last one is really just, we're focused on maximizing coverage. So we can get to every size bank across the US and make sure that we can be hyper local, right? We have some merchants that are very regional and they want to make sure we have the greatest coverage in that region. And that's important to us.
And just to remind people listening, and I always think of this too, you don't have to have the bank's permission per se. You can in some instances, but you don't have to, right, for someone to use sort of the platform that you've built.
That's right. Yeah, the banks, but it certainly helps, right? So we work very much in collaboration because, banks have security controls. They can put up multi-factor authentication and all kinds of other things. We work with banks to let them know what we're doing, how we're doing it, make sure they feel comfortable with security. We can get whitelisted by the bank. So we view ourselves as very bank friendly, but we don't need to be authorized per se. But if a bank is issuing their own APIs, then we want to work with them and work through their preferred method.
And so does that mean there are advantages to working with the bank as opposed to not, like to use their APIs? There's an advantage there?
There's a huge advantage if you use their APIs. I mean, if you want to play by their rules, but it's also a huge advantage to make sure that you have high quality and uptime, right? So the last thing you want to be doing is trying to process payments, and the bank's security systems, automatic systems are starting to block your APIs coming in. And right, that can be a huge problem. So for us, it's really about collaboratively working and making sure that the banks feel comfortable and that you can process the payments and get into the data when you need to do that. So huge advantage for us. We feel great about our quality, and we think we actually stand above everybody else in the market because of this.
And from what I've read, a lot of the technology that you've built in-house and you manage your own risk in-house and don't necessarily leverage a lot of other third parties from a technology stack perspective. So how is that a strategic advantage or differentiator for Trustly?
I think this is one of the most interesting things. When I joined Trustly, you come in and say, like, I understood about open banking. I understood about some of the headwinds, but I also believe that the world is ready for alternatives to cards. But how do you make it work, right? And so it is actually quite complex to build out connectors out to all of these banks. But ultimately, this is your network, right? So you need to be able to touch these consumers' accounts. And so we really focus on the quality and coverage. And the really unique thing about owning them is that we control our network. And so, for example, I can make risk rule change for a single merchant at a specific bank, and we can do powerful customization that just nobody else can do. If you're a fintech and you're using a third party's connector APIs, you really have no control. You just have a commoditized product that everybody has. That differentiates us. So we can really customize it. And secondarily, we have huge operating leverage and cost advantage in that, where everybody else in the market who's using these have a tariff to pay along the way.
You brought up something I want to dig a little deeper into there. You said you have the ability or flexibility customization down to a merchant level of changing something within the risk. Can you give obviously you don't have to name names, but can you give like a real live example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so we may know that, there's certain coverage that, there's risk rules that we may have set up that we know with certain banks, the way they view or they produce data might be a little bit different for a certain merchant for that's, and we can, our risk rules might actually block or think that it's more high risk, but for certain banks or for certain merchants, we can actually customize all of that, at very granular level to be able to make sure that we're processing as many payments safely and risk-free as we can, right? So in a guaranteed ACH or guaranteed, payment process, we take and cover the loss. And so for us, certainly there are some payments that we don't approve, but our biggest goal and our biggest objective working with a merchant is to approve as many as we can. So in a situation where we know that a certain bank, may have put certain information into their banks. There's a lot of flexibility for us. So it just gives us a ton of opportunity to be able to customize this. We know we have certain merchants that operate in certain regions and they really want to believe that, they have a high number of their customers banking at a particular regional bank. So we can look at those and look and make certain risk rules just for that bank to make sure that we're maximizing the potential of that merchant.
That's interesting. So let's talk about the future a little bit. Can this type of open banking solution help with some other pain points merchants might have, like maybe cross-border payments? And if so, how would it help with cross-border payments?
Well, I think cross-border is really quite interesting, right? There's the C2B market is quite interesting. That was my background coming in. And we're seeing a lot of benefits across Europe. So we have some models to be able to look at from Trustly in Europe because they have small region. They're based in Sweden. They have one currency. We have euro, we have pounds, and consumers are moving and purchasing goods within the region and within the currencies. And if you're doing that on a card, you're getting charged 3 to 5%. Of foreign exchange costs. That's a huge, huge margin that goes into the card schemes. So for us, I was just actually in Canada last week, and you think about tens of thousands of Canadians are buying snowbird homes in Florida and elsewhere, every year. And they actually have struggled to pay for their local bills. So there's huge opportunities for them to pay with their local and have a really low foreign exchange rate because we can convert it into dollars into local. So there's a huge opportunity for us to enable people to move across borders and have a really low foreign exchange, right? That's not our core business. We're really trying to maximize conversion for merchants. And so if we can do that and we can bring down lower foreign exchange, that's a big opportunity. Never to mind, just B2B, which is a much larger market.
Sure. So beyond cross-border payments, what do you think's next for open banking in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think you're going to see new entrants. There's no doubt about that, but we definitely have a huge head start. For us, we're really focused on consumer value. The merchant proposition has been clear. It's really about awesome user experience and cost savings. For the consumers, we think there's huge runway of opportunity to continue to give them greater flexibility in how they want to pay. We can enable them to use their data, right? The premise of open banking was like you could actually port your data somewhere and move your balances. And that actually doesn't exist yet. Giving them more insights and really building a relationship with their banking data that goes beyond what certain banks do. And some of these are built into, different fintech, apps in a variety, but a lot of these apps tend to be split out. You have 2 or 3 apps that all do different things. We just think through your spending when you're doing this, we can provide it right in the flow and in the context to give you greater value from there. So that's a huge part for us. We will continue to see geographic expansion as we see this move across. We work with some of the largest global e-commerce players out there, and they want a single API to hit the world. So we will continue to grow with our partners and bring them more value. So that's going to be a big initiative for us as you continue to see. And we're starting to see, incubation across Latin America and many other markets for open banking. I do believe that you will see also greater regulation and greater participation from the banks in trying to manage privacy, trust, security.
Just a quick follow-up on that. On the consumer side, I mean, do you see a day where you put in your bank credentials and based on the merchant, based on the bank, based on who you are as a consumer, that you would be able to serve up specific offers on other things or other promotions or even real-time discounts on existing, things in your shopping cart? I mean, is that kind of the consumer of the future for open banking?
Well, I think it is, right? I mean, I think interestingly, and we have this product today, we actually offer it in certain areas. Like we can create, we can validate your ID, validate your bank, load a payment and make the payment and do it all in one click and create an account for you at a merchant, like in one click. It's amazing what you can do when you have the data and you have a consumer who's, wants to do this with you. So the more that you have that consumer and the more they trust you, you want to reward them for that. And you look at saying, how do I bring you more deals? And while we don't have anything working on that today, but we definitely see that on the roadmap.
Well, Pete, we've covered a lot of ground today about you and your background, obviously about Trustly and what all the great things Trustly's doing, and obviously about open banking. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Listen, I think open banking is here to stay. I think it is very disruptive, and I think you're going to start to see the flywheel. So I really do think you're going to start to see this hit every aspect of your lives over the next 12 to 24 months. And for those in the payments business, and come visit trustly.com. We're hiring, and we would love to work with you if you're a merchant.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for being on the show. I know your time is very valuable, so thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Greg.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.